The Dodgers just turned the league upside down. And nobody saw it coming. Not the analysts. Not the rival front offices. Not even the beat reporters who cover this team every single day. When the news broke, it didn't arrive with a dramatic press conference or a carefully staged announcement. It came quietly. The way the most dangerous moves always do. The Dodgers completed a 4-for-1 trade. They added a Red Sox pitcher. And before the ink had even dried on the paperwork, 2 pitchers were immediately designated for assignment. 2 more were demoted. Gone. Just like that. Players who had worn that uniform, who had warmed up in that bullpen, who had believed they were part of something, removed from the equation in a single afternoon. And then Dave Roberts stood in front of the microphone. His words were not loud. They were not angry. But they landed heavier than anything that had happened on a baseball field this week. They are no longer a valuable asset. The room went still. Let's go back to the beginning. Because this story didn't start today. It started with a problem the Dodgers had been carrying quietly for weeks. A problem that lived in the bullpen. A problem that showed up in the wrong moments, in the wrong innings, against the wrong lineups. And a problem that Andrew Friedman had clearly decided he was done tolerating. The Dodgers entered this season with championship expectations. That was not a surprise. It is never a surprise with this organization. But expectations and execution are 2 different things. And somewhere in the middle of this season, the gap between those 2 things started to grow. Not because of Shohei Ohtani. Not because of the rotation. But because of depth. Because of reliability. Because of what happens when the 7th inning arrives and the wrong name gets called from the bullpen. Friedman watched. He calculated. And then he acted. The trade came through. For players moving out of Los Angeles. 1 pitcher coming in from Boston. On the surface, it reads like a lopsided exchange. 4-for-1. How does that make sense? How does a front office justify sending away 4 players to acquire a single arm? The answer is simpler than it sounds. Not all 4 players were equal. Not all 4 were part of the plan. And the moment the Dodgers decided that certain pieces no longer fit the vision, holding on to them became a liability, not a luxury. The trade wasn't about subtraction. It was about clarity. About sending away what wasn't working to make room for what might. And what arrived from Boston was not just a pitcher. It was a statement. The Red Sox pitcher stepping into the Dodgers organization knows what this moment means. He has spent time in a system that was rebuilding, recalibrating, searching for its next identity. Now he walks into a machine. A machine with Shohei Ohtani at the center. A machine with a rotation that is already among the deepest in baseball. A machine that does not sign players to see what happens. It signs players because it already knows what will happen. That transition is not small. That pressure is not invisible. But Friedman did not make this trade out of hope. He made it out of information. Out of data that the public hasn't seen. Out of scouting reports that didn't match what the surface numbers were saying. Out of a belief, built over months, that this specific arm in this specific environment could become something more dangerous than it had been in Boston. That belief is now being tested in real time. And then there were the 2 who didn't survive the announcement. Designated for assignment. DFA. 2 letters that carry the full weight of professional baseball's cruelty. You are on the roster. You are part of the plan. And then, without warning, you are not. Your locker gets cleared. Your name disappears from the lineup card. And somewhere in the building, a decision has already been made that your chapter here is finished. For these 2 pitchers, the DFA wasn't the result of one bad outing. It wasn't a single bad week. It was an accumulation. It was a pattern that the coaching staff had seen, had tried to correct, had worked around, and had ultimately decided they could no longer afford to manage. Not with October approaching. Not with the margin for error shrinking with every game. Roberts had seen enough. His words in that press conference were not thrown carelessly. They were chosen. A manager of his experience understands what it means to say something publicly about players who are still in the building, still processing what just happened to their careers. He knew the weight of the words before he said them. They are no longer a valuable asset. He didn't elaborate immediately. He let that sentence sit in the room. And the reporters who were there understood that there was nothing to push back on. This was not a door left slightly open. This was a door being closed, deliberately, with both hands. 2 others were demoted. Not cut. Not released. But sent down. Reassigned. Which in some ways carries its own particular sting. Because a demotion is not an ending. It is a message. It says, what you have shown us here is not enough. Go back. Prove something different. And maybe, if the circumstances change and the performance changes and the need arises, we will call you again. Maybe. But in a Dodgers system this deep, with this much talent moving through at every level, that maybe is not guaranteed. The path back to this roster is not a short road. It is a road with traffic on it. And the players who just got sent down know that better than anyone. Roberts didn't frame the demotions as punishment. He framed them as adjustment. As movement. As the organization doing what organizations at this level must do when the gap between what is needed and what is being delivered becomes too wide to ignore. But everyone in that room understood what was really being said. The Dodgers are not waiting anymore. Now look at the pitching list. 13 names. 13 arms on a staff that already includes one of the greatest two-way players in the history of the sport. Ohtani's name sits at the top of that list not just alphabetically, not just by salary, but by impact. By the gravitational pull he creates around every game he touches. When Ohtani pitches, the opposing lineup has to prepare differently. When Ohtani bats, the opposing pitcher has to approach him differently than any other hitter in the world. He is not a variable in the equation. He is the equation. And every other pitcher on that list of 13 exists, in some way, in relationship to what he does and what he cannot do on any given week. That is the reality of managing a staff that includes Shohei Ohtani. Roberts understands this better than anyone. He is not just managing innings and pitch counts and matchups. He is managing a rotation around a phenomenon. He is making decisions that have never had to be made before in the history of this game, because the player at the center of those decisions has never existed before. And now, with a new arm arriving from Boston and 2 spots suddenly vacant in the bullpen, those decisions just became more complicated. And more important. There is a version of this story that gets written as a roster transaction. 4 players out. 1 player in. 2 DFA'd. 2 demoted. Numbers moving around a spreadsheet. That version is accurate. But it is not complete. The complete version is about what the Dodgers believe this season can be. About a front office that looked at its bullpen depth in the middle of a pennant race and decided that acceptable was not good enough. About a manager who stood in front of reporters and used language that left no room for misinterpretation. About an organization that has spent years building a culture where accountability is not a concept discussed in team meetings. It is enacted. Publicly. Without hesitation. The players who were designated for assignment are professionals. They will land somewhere. They will get opportunities. This is not the end of their careers. But it is the end of their time inside this particular machine. And the moment that machine decided they were no longer part of the plan, there was no sentiment that could change the outcome. Friedman does not make emotional decisions. Roberts does not make emotional decisions. That is precisely why this organization has remained at the top of the league for as long as it has. Emotion is for the fans. Operations are for the data, the trust in the process, and the cold clarity of what is and is not working. The reporter who asked Roberts the final question wanted to know if this was the end of the roster movement. Were more changes coming? Were there other players looking over their shoulders? Roberts paused. Not long. But long enough. He placed both hands flat on the table in front of him. He looked directly at the reporter. And when he answered, his voice carried the particular weight of someone who has already made decisions that haven't been announced yet. We're always evaluating. That's what you have to do at this level. You can't get comfortable. Comfortable is how you lose. He didn't say more was coming. He didn't say it wasn't. And that ambiguity, in a Dodgers press conference room in the middle of a pennant race, with 13 pitchers on the active list and a 4-for-1 trade just completed and 2 players freshly designated for assignment, that ambiguity was its own kind of answer. Somewhere in the Dodgers facility, Ohtani is preparing for his next start. He is not thinking about the trade. He is not thinking about the roster moves. He is thinking about the next opposing lineup. About the next sequence of pitches. About the next moment when the game is on the line and the ball is in his hand and everything else goes quiet. That is who he is. And the Dodgers just reshaped their entire pitching staff to make sure that when that moment comes, and it will come, everything around him is exactly where it needs to be. The league has been warned.